It's going to be probably, I'd say, anywhere from on top of the soil down to 2 to 3 inches generally. I've seen wireworms hit corn planted 3 inches deep. I've seen cutworms cut corn off an inch under the soil.
We're talking about those and other insects that can damage the corn crop across the Mid-South, also slugs, on the AgNow Roundup. Well, good morning and welcome to the AgNow Roundup. My name is Dave Deacon. The wind is blowing, the weather is changing, and the corn crop is going into the ground. One of the largest pressures for a successful corn crop is, of course, insects. And that's why we're talking with Dr. Sebe Brown from the University of Tennessee Extension about the insect pressure across the volunteer state. And we'll be talking with him in just a few minutes. But first, let's take a look at the ever-changing weather across the ag world from our friend, meteorologist Matt Makins.
AgNow weather time, it's Matt Makins here. Hope you're doing well. Over the next couple of weeks, kind of the biggest threat we have over, say, the next 10 days or so is going to be very strong winds for the high plains and parts of the Rocky Mountains. And that's a long-lasting threat from the 25th through the 1st of May. Why is that a threat? This same region has really got a lot of dry grasses and forages. We need water here. Fire danger will be exceptionally high in that same area, coinciding with that very strong wind. Outside of that, we're looking for heavy rainfall in central and eastern Texas into parts of Arkansas and Louisiana through May 1st. So sustained impacts there with heavy rainfall. Let's check some soil temperatures. I'm going to do this frequently as we go through the next couple of weeks. We're seeing some of the shallowest layers really warming up quickly now. A lot of the corn country, a lot of that crop area, temperatures of the soils have really warmed up. We're seeing some impacts to plant due to maybe passing rain or passing snow showers, but overall we are well in our way to planting, and the soils are getting ready. With warm soils, we need some water now that they can soak that water in, right? Well, here's a look at the soil moisture in the root zones. We have dry conditions throughout a lot of the Four Corners region, from southeastern Colorado through New Mexico and West Texas in particular. Panhandle of Texas also has a dry bullseye. Very dry around Iowa, and parts of the Ohio Valley also very dry in those root zones. Favorable areas, especially for hay production, alfalfa, some of the grass country of Nebraska on into the high plains of Montana, however, that's a lot of soil moisture that's pretty good shape as of now. With warm soils and the need for this moisture, that soil can suck in that water. Let's see what happens, especially around Iowa over the coming week. We have some water that's just passing through that region today, kind of a lull in the action for a few days. Late this week into the weekend, although the Rockies will have some moisture. And there comes one bout of some heavy rainfall down to the south, but we're still looking in the corn country and relatively quiet until we hit early next week. Risks of severe weather will be possible next week with a passing system. There'll be a few passing systems to speak of. Now we're into the midweek and late week, and watch around here around Texas. That's going to be a developing system. Starts to crank up, produce heavy thunderstorms, then it lifts north into the corn country, then out to the east. So yeah, we do have some passing systems, but kind of the next biggest impactor, if you will, is going to be the last few days of April going into early May. In terms of total precip, as we go through just about the end of the month, we'll go through the 28th here, have a couple of bullseyes here. One is down to the south, the other is kind of in the mid-Mississippi, but you can see that water wraps up into the high plains, getting into the northern Rockies too. Colorado will have some snowfall, as well as Nebraska, out of some of that precipitation. But if we zoom that map into kind of bullseye number one, there's Oklahoma City. We have Little Rock, and in between, we're going to be tallying up 2 to 2.5 to 3 inch totals in a number of areas. Again, that's going to come with thunderstorms, and of course we're kind of into severe weather season, so got to watch out for that. Then farther up to the north, here's Jefferson City, St. Joe, Kirksville, Quincy, and around St. Louis. We have some of these bullseyes here also of 2.5 to 3 inch totals of rain, and they try to spread into that corn country of Iowa. Certainly do so into Illinois, and some decent rainfall ahead for parts of Indiana. In terms of snow, we're kind of running out of cold temperatures here as we go through mid-spring now. So not a lot of snow in the States. There's going to be some in the Rockies, so parts of Colorado, maybe around Cheyenne, a snowstorm to wrap up this week and get into the weekend. But most of the snow is going to stay up to the north here, up and throughout Canada, up into that colder air. Let's just wrap up this AgNow weather report with a look at the weekly preset for the next 4 weeks. We kind of talked about through the 25th, and that's going to favor parts of Texas, the southeast. You get into the last few days of April into early May. There's going to be a wet bullseye there in some of the same areas we talked about. Still looking wet for the plains as we get into the first week of May. Into the second week of May, some hit and miss areas of moisture there. In terms of temperatures, the coldest period is right now, this week. We'll lift that out of here. We'll start to see some warming temperatures across the south for the end of April into early May. Still a little unsettled for the first 2 weeks of May. Not necessarily cold, but cooler than average by a couple of degrees anyway. So the warming trend here as we get into spring is still somewhat sluggish, but we do have moments of it. Once we get into mid-May, late May, the precip pattern still looks favorable for those in the plains and the high plains, even the prairies of Canada, and we'll have more updates on that as we get closer. Until then, Matt Makins here.
It's proving to be a very busy time of year when it comes to weather across the country, and thank you so much, Matt. When it comes to corn production across the country, there are different things that can limit yield, and one of the biggest threats to the crop can actually happen before the plant gets out of the ground. We have Dr. Sebe Brown from the University of Tennessee Extension to tell us about the insects that have the largest impact on the corn crop across Tennessee. Dr. Brown, what are some of the things that producers are seeing in the corn production season throughout Tennessee?
So some of the biggest issues we face, and this is in the Mid-South in general, but in Tennessee being a part of the Mid-South, wireworms are a big pest we fight here, especially since we're no-till. White grubs, we'll have sugarcane beetles, you'll have cutworms potentially show up. Actually, I got a phone call about cutworms yesterday in corn. And so we see pretty, especially being that we're no-till and we're a little bit different than some of the other Mid-South states. We're 90% no-till in Tennessee. Our below-ground insect pressure can be a little bit more severe than, say, some of the states to our south or potentially our east because they put steel in the ground, whereas we don't. We plant into stale seed beds. We plant behind cover crops. And so we have a pretty intense below ground selection pressure on us for corn when it comes, especially in my geography. And then, we still do see a fair amount in the Mid-South as well.
And that really makes it difficult this time of year with the corn plants emerging, and it's almost like they're already coming out fighting for existence. And what advice do you have for producers throughout this time period in the corn production?
So, big thing is have a quality seed treatment, number one. And so I typically recommend, based on the research that I've done, my colleagues have done, we like the Poncho suite of seed treatments. I typically don't recommend anything less than Poncho 500. If you're corn behind corn and you haven't rotated in several years, or if you're in virgin ground that's never been put in corn, say you pick up a pasture ground and you put it in corn, I would typically recommend Poncho 1250 for the sheer fact that, especially where we are, we build up below ground insect issues pretty heavily, pretty quickly. And so, and we see that if we don't use a seed treatment for 2 years in a row, whether it be some guys run non-treated corn, or you plant non-treated wheat behind it, or non-treated beans in there, and you've got a couple consecutive years where you don't have protection in the ground on some kind of seed that you're using, we will build up pretty devastating levels of wireworms. So, it really is, I guess, going forward, typically what I recommend to all the growers is that use a quality seed treatment on your corn, and then make sure, plant population, it's a lot more important with corn than it is with, say, soybeans, because you've got some wiggle room with beans because you've got so many plants per foot or per acre out there. Corn, we're running 2 to 2.5 per foot. You lose one, and then you're losing yield. So, it's, having and protecting that seed is really important, especially from the get-go. And so that's something I try to harp on with our growers and our ag professionals here. So.
Well, and you actually started into a question that I was going to ask about crop rotations.
Mhm.
Do you see more insect pressure, say, and you already kind of answered that, but say corn after corn versus corn after wheat, or doing a double crop of corn and then soybeans?
So normally we see our worst pressure is going to be when we're corn behind corn. So, and
Right.
that's, we got a lot of guys, that may run corn behind corn for several years in a row. And then we see that's some of the worst infestations I see is when guys are corn behind corn, and they may not rotate away for a while. That's some of the worst ones that I've encountered in my career. Versus where guys rotate, you put wheat or you run corn and beans or corn and cotton. We see that at least from like a nematode standpoint, from a below ground insect standpoint, that's going to be overall better if you can rotate and you're not just one crop behind each other for several years in a row.
So take me through the rest of the season. What should producers be scouting for as the crop progresses towards harvest?
So typically, and what I tell growers is pretty much with BT corn, essentially, BT corn is more or less taken over the planting acres, and
Right.
so our earliest, the biggest gamble that we face is getting corn out of the ground. Once you get corn out of the ground, BT pretty much takes care of the rest of it. So once we get out of early season, you're looking at knee-high corn, potentially. The biggest issue that we face if you're in non-BT is going to be corn borers. Pretty much is going to be the most yield-limiting insect we're going to see is going to be corn borers. And so, guys, typically we have a threshold that we recommend prior to tassel or at tassel. You can do it based on traps or you can do it based on scouting for eggs. And so corn borers are I would say, the most economically yield-limiting pests that we have in our non-BT corn that our growers face. Corn earworm is going to be kind of a secondary pest. It's not yield, so corn earworm is not yield limiting, at least for us in the Mid-South. And so it's one of those pests that it looks bad, it chews on kernels in the ear, but in the reality of the situation, unless you're planting corn in June or ultra late, if you plant corn in the recommended time window that we have in the Mid-South, specifically, or in Tennessee, you may get some tip feeding, you may get some kernel feeding by corn earworm, but you're not going to really see a significant decrease in yield, or at least a yield that we could potentially measure with statistics. Because my colleagues in Mississippi conducted a lot of research on this several years back, and it takes anywhere from, I believe, an average of 30 to 40 kernels per ear on every ear in that field to equal a measurable yield loss that we can see with statistics.
Wow.
And so,
Wow.
that little bit of tip feeding or even a little bit of kernel nibbling that these corn earworms are doing, realistically, it looks bad, but are you going to lose yield? What the data says no. So that's typically where we go. I mean, stink bugs can become an issue in there, but stink bug, I haven't seen too many stink bug issues in corn in my career. I know they're there. And if you go to the east in like North Carolina, or you go to the south in Mississippi, stink bugs can become more of a problem, especially when the ears and you're getting right at the vegetative stage. The ears are, fixing to go into tassel. The ear's about 2 inches long. You're getting kind of that bulge. If stink bugs come in at that time frame and they start feeding on the ear, then that can cause what we see a cow-warmed ear or malformed ears. That's direct yield loss, but those seem to become fewer and farther between. So,
what kind of treatment window is there for these? Because I know after a certain amount of time, you're going to be getting into potential damage to the actual plant. How far into the maturity process of the corn plant can you actually treat for these?
For, say, corn borers?
Right, yeah.
So typically we're going to, about once we hit tassel to anywhere till about R3, we're going to see, once you hit dent, you're going to be past susceptibility stage. But the most critical time frame there is about that tassel shot. So once you hit tassel, roughly that's going to be your really important stage. And what we see, you can still make a crop with corn borers coming in corn. The issue is we have lodging. And so it's still going to make an ear. It's still going to, you can get some tunneling through some cobs in very bad years. But I mean, based on our threshold that we have in Tennessee, that tassel shot is going to be really the important stage for controlling corn borers. But the reality is, and where we are with BT, is that the vast majority of our acres outside of our refuge acres are going to be BT. And BT is still extremely effective for corn borer. And so we have no instances, and we monitor for this, no instances of BT resistance in any of our corn borer populations in Tennessee. We really don't see it in the Mid-South in general. And so it's good that our BT corn that we have is still very effective for corn borers. So much so to the point where if you have areas that are a lot of BT in one large area, you won't even catch a corn borer in a pheromone baited trap because the numbers are so suppressed.
Wow.
So, yeah,
that's remarkable. So let me go back to the insects that thrive in the soil. Why do we see such a longevity for those insects? Is it because no-till, but is it the temperature that's not getting down to a temperature that could actually help kill them off in the winter?
So that's a lot of it. That's typically, we don't get as cold in the South as obviously people do up north.
Right.
I mean, the Midwest experiences extreme cold. We don't in the South. I mean, now granted, Tennessee had some very cold weather this past year. We were down to -6, so that may actually influence things. But at the same time, I mean, the soil, as any person in agriculture knows, your air temperature is vastly different than your soil temperature. And so, you may be 0 degrees outside, but your soil temperature may be 32, 30, somewhere around there, if it's not frozen on top with snow or ice. And if it's under a snow layer, you're going to get insulation on it, so it may even be higher. So that's not cold enough to kill insects. And so, a lot of these insects, they overwinter as a very hardy morph, a hardy life stage. Depending on, like, white grubs can be, depending on the species, they can be in the grub stage, they can be in the beetle stage, the pupal stage, depending on whatever species you're looking at. Sugarcane beetles are the same way. You've got an overwintering adult stage. You've got an overwintering larval stage. Click beetles or wireworms, they're going to be typically a worm at that stage or an immature version of that beetle, and that's what does the damage. And they can burrow into the soil pretty as deep as they need to, as long as it's not a really heavy clay compacted soil. They can move around very easily. And what I tell growers all the time is that the air temperature that causes your corn plant to stop growing or your bean plant to stop growing is not the same temperature that stops an insect from moving. And so just because it's cold to you outside, you go 3 inches in that soil, it may be 20, 30 degrees warmer, depending on the several factors. So, that's why these insects are pretty dang hardy. And so they're built to survive. And then, you've got kind of a buffer area in that soil, so they hang around.
What depths do we typically see the insect activity in the soil?
So anywhere, I mean, it's going to be probably, I'd say, anywhere from on top of the soil down to 2 to 3 inches generally. I've seen wireworms hit corn planted 3 inches deep. I've seen cutworms cut corn off an inch under the soil. So it really kind of depends. It depends on a lot on if you're a finer textured soil, you got a real compacted clay that turns into concrete. They're not going to be able to move as readily as they will, say, in sand or a loam. If you've got a very coarse soil, sandy soils, they can move all around in sand with no problems. And so that's some of the worst issues we see with below ground insects, is that if you've got a sandy or a loam soil that's really coarse textured and it doesn't pack real hard, they can move in and out very easily. So soil type, soil texture does matter too.
One thing I really enjoy talking with extension and research folks from all over the country about is some of the research that they're doing within their state. What are you looking at in your program to help the producers across Tennessee?
So we do a number of things. We evaluate seed treatment efficacy, amounts, type, in-furrow placement underneath and around seeds, whether that's corn, soybeans, cotton, grain sorghum, wheat. We'll look at BT efficacy in corn and in cotton. We'll look at foliar efficacy. So, how does foliar sprays work on all these crops? We reevaluate thresholds. So that's a big, something that we look at a lot as entomologists, is that we make sure our thresholds are validated and current. And so when we make a recommendation, we know that the grower, it's gonna make the grower money. And these thresholds are still very, very valid for us to use across Tennessee and the Mid-South. And that's a big part of my job. Resistance management is one. That's, we don't have a whole lot of options coming out of the pipeline for insecticides, so we've got to make use of what we currently have. And so being able to steward those insecticides and use them in an appropriate manner that helps preserve their longevity, but also gives growers appropriate control for the target pests, is something that we really strive to look at. So
one thing a lot of producers, especially in your area, are encountering are slugs, but maybe not so much in corn, but maybe soybeans?
Yeah, so slugs have become a big problem over the past, I guess, say several years. And so,
wow.
And that's, being an entomologist, we're the catch-all. So we catch, I work on rats, birds, slugs, bugs. I mean, you name it. If nobody else wants to work on it, the weeds guys or the disease guys don't want to work on it, then they give it to the entomologists. And so slugs they're becoming an extremely detrimental pest for us in certain areas. And some of the issues is that we have really, outside of the baits, which are expensive, and they go out at low use rates. So we're talking, 10 to 20 pounds per acre, being with a prohibitively high cost at that rate. That's about all we have for control. And, we can't use conventional insecticides. First off, aren't labeled. And second, none of them work. So there's really no spray your way out of slugs, and which is what everybody wants, is that I can spray my way out of 3-cornered alfalfa hoppers and soybeans, but right. I can't do this with slugs. And so something we're looking at a potential foliar option. But in the meantime, residue management is going to be a big one. Since we're no-till in Tennessee, you'll have guys that'll plant a soybean crop into 270 bushel corn residue. And since we don't chop that up, we just let stalks lay. That's a lot of organic material, a lot of residue that slugs can harbor in throughout the year, especially in the fall. And once you go replant beans into it, they're there just to munch on your crop. Weeds and cover crops are the same way. Anything organic that they can feed on, slugs will be there. And so they typically like a cooler, wet spring, and they're becoming a serious issue because, with corn grows fast enough, and being that it's a grass, you can chew a lot off on corn as long as you don't hit the growing point. Corn's going to be fine. With soybeans, if they nip off the cotyledons and then hit that growing point, that's done. And so, we see, I get several phone calls every year for guys fighting slugs, and what can we do? And the biggest issue is, the biggest things I can tell guys are make sure you have a timely burn down out. I mean, you want those weeds or that cover crop graveyard dead before you plant into it. And then you want to make sure you get good seed to soil contact and seed furrow closure. You want that seed to be underneath the soil, because a lot of times what I'll see is guys are running, everybody's in a hurry during planting season. And so guys will, we all have these extremely fast planters. Guys can plant 10 miles an hour. The problem is sometimes those seed furrows don't close. And then if you've got soybeans germinating, what'll happen is the slugs will fall off into the seed furrow, and it's like a buffet. They will just eat the seeds as they emerge, one after the other after the other. And then before you know it, you've lost 100 yards of stand out of several rows from a handful of slugs. And so they're insidious. And so that's something that a lot of my early season work in beans is geared towards slugs. And so it's, and I don't have great answers. So hopefully I will one day, but we're working on it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown with the University of Tennessee, for going on with us and helping producers not only in Tennessee, but also the Mid-South understand about your entomology program there in Tennessee.
Thank you for having me.
Well, and of course, thank you for watching this episode of the AgNow Roundup. If there's something on the show that you'd like to learn more about, visit our website, agnowtv.com. And while you're there, sign up for our social media accounts, our email, or you can even download the AgNow TV app, all right there at agnowtv.com. It's the redesigned website, so go over there and check it out. From our farm to your farm, I'm Dave Deacon for AgNow.